welcome back to the stage Peter Schlosser.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of GF23. We had a real great start into the conference yesterday. It was topped by the boat cruise, and I think some people might still be in thought or spirit on the Hudson, so I think that the room will fill in. I hope you all had a good time seeing New York from a different perspective, from the water. For me, that's always an eye-opener, how different you perceive a city or a landscape when you're looking at it from the water rather than moving in it. So today we have another full program with wonderful speakers, wonderful topics, panels, getting ready for the first one, so I won't take too much time. But what I would like to do is to talk a bit about the work sessions. Because when we looked at the report, when I listened to the report outs from the work sessions, I noticed that there must have been a lot of discussion about the nature of the must-dos. So what we really want to do is to go from the must-dos to how do we actually implement these actions. And you might have noticed yesterday during the sessions, there were examples where some of the speakers actually told you about how they actually were moving into the action space, where they went from the must-haves to the must-dos to saying, well, how are we actually doing it? What can we do on the ground? Where can we do it? Who has to be involved? What has to be involved? There's the scientific knowledge, there is the translation, there is the investment, financing, etc. So we really have to get into that space. So if you are contemplating, there are still 8 must-haves to be contemplated for today, for tomorrow. Please don't spend too much time trying to refine the must-dos. Rather, focus on just a few of them, possibly just one of them, and say, what are we seeing as possibilities to act upon them, to get them into the action space, to implement them, and which examples do we know that have been put into the real world? How can we scale it? And where are new ideas of what we can do and how we envision to scale that? So that is the main message I want to give this morning as we are going through the day, because today we will contemplate the action space for 4 of the must-haves and 4 tomorrow. And it's really important for us to get to the point where when we walk away from this conference to be able to say, here are pathways, accelerated pathways. Remember yesterday when we opened, Johan spoke about this exponential track that we have to get onto so that we are not falling further behind the problem development in the solution space. So let's really focus on where are these pathways that we can imagine to be implemented, and they can go onto an accelerated track in the solution space. So with that, I will hand over to Andrew Alex, to open with the next panel, and the voice of God will introduce you properly.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, to start things off today, please welcome to the stage to deliver the first spotlight presentation, Sandrine Dixson-Declève, co-president of the Club of Rome.
Thank you very much. And we should be having a room that is completely overflowing here. It's a bit of a shame. There's so many people in different parts of New York who are in the midst of a variety of different discussions, but I think that the narrative that we have here is so fundamental. And I want to contribute to that narrative. So I am the co-president of the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome, some of you may or may not know, was started in 1968. Esteemed members, economists, scientists from across the globe, actually started by an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur, Aurelio Pache, who basically saw that if we continued to grow beyond the resources of our planet, that we would hit some very serious tipping points. He commissioned some incredible MIT scientists to do some of the first system dynamic modeling. And that system dynamic modeling turned into the results which were published in a seminal report called The Limits to Growth. 50 years later, myself and other esteemed members, including Johan Rockström, decided that we needed not to celebrate the 50 years, because just as we've talked about the must-haves and the must-dos, we realized that we must change. The fact is, we wasted 50 years. We knew everything that we know today 50 years ago because we knew that there were limits to growth. We knew that we were living within finite boundaries. We knew that we were passing the planetary boundaries. So we built our analysis on the knowledge of the limits to growth, the knowledge of the planetary boundaries, working with Johan and other collaborators to then publish what we called Earth4All, a survival guide for humanity. Now, why is that so important that we use that title? One, because we wanted not to be called the Doomsday Club. To say there is an Earth for all, we can create alternative futures. Two, to say time's up. We are in a planetary emergency, hence why we need a survival guide. And that's built on the previous planetary emergency plan that Johan and myself actually wrote. Now, what has happened since then? 1 year, 8 translations later, including Chinese, French, Swedish, and other languages. On the bestseller list, 700 articles across the globe, and we realized, not that we wanted to pat ourselves on the back, that somehow we had gotten something right. We'd gotten something right because we were able to translate the narrative of we're fucked, excuse my language, into we have hope. But we have to hunker down. And hunkering down means that we need to put in place 5 key turnarounds. And it's not just about the climate. It's not just about environmental impacts. It's actually most importantly what came out of most of our system dynamic modeling was that we need to deal with inequality. We need to deal with poverty. We need to deal with empowerment. We need to understand our food system as an ecosystem of change and transition and transform our energy system. Those are the 5 turnarounds that would get us from today's too little, too late scenario into the giant leap scenario. And then, about 6 months ago, we were asked to stress test the SDGs against this model and to see where we would be in terms of the 17 SDGs. Last week, I presented to the UN, and in particular the Secretary General and his senior management team, this new report, SDG for All, a series of strategic scenarios. And what does that tell us? Unfortunately, it tells us the same thing that we saw in Earth for All. If we don't deal with poverty and inequality first, we will not meet our climate targets. But the 2 key red flags that came out of that report, which are fundamental. Number 1, even with the giant leap scenario, we do not plateau in terms of our climatic impacts. So climate action today enables us to live a semi-okay life until 2070. That's the hard reality, people. Now, what is that linked to? That's linked to the fact that we are still burning fossil energy. And we can talk about tripling renewables. We can talk about shifting capital. We can talk about all we need to do to create the right decarbonized technology and ensure that all of the high carbon industrial producers shift. But if we do not fundamentally phase out fossil fuels, we will not get there. That's the fact. So that means both tripling our investments, ensuring that the just transition plan is one of equity and poverty alleviation. It means thinking about debt cancellation. What happened at the Macron summit? Some of you may have actually followed, I don't know if you did, in Paris in May. Total disaster. Why? Out of the 4 working groups that were working actually on trying to bring something to enable the global south to be able to transition was on debt cancellation. What happened? Does anybody know who owns half of the African debt? Take a guess. Anyone? BlackRock. Who was sitting on the 4th working group on debt cancellation? BlackRock. Why is it that we actually didn't get a solution? BlackRock. Now, I'm going to call that out because as we sit here in New York, and actually last year I closed Wall Street with Earth4All. Unbelievable to be in Wall Street, on the floor, with Earth4All everywhere, while everybody was thinking capital for all. And the fact of the matter is, we need to call this out. We need to hold the investment community accountable. On one hand, they say that they're helping. They are helping by investing in the technologies that we need. But on the other hand, they're seriously blocking the transition that we need in the countries that truly need the support, because they're strangled by debt. Debt that we have created in terms of trade deficits based on our dependency on their materials, which we have actually never paid for because they are global commons. So that is the reality of where we are. So that when we go into the must-haves and the must-dos, all of which are incredibly important, we also need to be realistic about the real barriers that are out there. We need to be much more strategic about how we truly enable those that are the poorest, those that are the most unequal in society, to be able to move towards well-being. Because the key model shift that we saw both in Earth4All and also in SDG4All is that we need to put in place the right indicators to shift our current extractive economy into an economy of well-being. That means placing a value on education. That means placing a value on wealth distribution. That means putting in place the right taxation structures. That means working as we do with patriotic millionaires so that they can all fess up to the fact that, yes, we all need to contribute. Because the fact of the matter is that there is no Wall Street on a dead planet. There is no Wall Street. There is no trading. There is no shareholder value when you've got revolution in the streets. Instability and insecurity is a situation that will affect all of us. We can all become refugees if we don't put in place the right systems that actually build up an equitable and egalitarian space. This is not about communism. This is about being equal. And so the last key red flag that I want to come up with, in particular in the report that we've just had on SDG4All, is actually gender equality, the empowerment of women, the fact that women need to play an important part in this new economy. And what we saw in our analysis, the sad truth, it will take us 250 years to get to the gender goals unless we truly shift the way in which we address parity. And parity is not about just equity. Actually, in this case, I would say that gender equality is about giving women the role that they deserve at a time when we are facing the greatest complex, wicked problems we've ever seen. We know that we are greater when we have a variety of different minds and souls and hearts working together to unpack the biggest problems that we're facing. So Earth4All and SDG4All, two very key messages. We've unpacked the problems that are facing us today through the system dynamic modeling. We've come to some very clear recommendations that are anchored predominantly in dealing with inequality and poverty first. Addressing universal basic dividends, ensuring that we do the debt cancellation, or at least debt swaps and rethinking debt, looking at SDRs, looking at taxation structures, and actually true wealth distribution. But also putting in place the necessary capital flows to shift the technology to where it needs to go and to truly create a low carbon market in the way in which we all know would then service people, planet, and prosperity. This is the moment where we need to step up to the plate here in New York and not allow for the usual conversations and complacency about where we are. The number of people that came up to me since Monday, aren't you excited about everything that's happening? We need to hold that excitement within a knowledge of knowing that actually we are nowhere where we need to be. No pain, no gain. I am the third generation of a family that lived the Second World War in Belgium, a grandfather that was in concentration camp, and I bring that to you because who would have thought that from there we would have had the European Union? My co-president lived apartheid. was working with Mandela, was actually thrown out of South Africa, who would have thought that actually we would have seen a completely different South Africa today? Alternative futures are about understanding the alternatives and what we can create. We can anchor those alternative futures in the knowledge that we have through system dynamic modeling, through the science, through the data. But then we have to create the narrative that will truly move us to that alternative future. The must-dos alongside that narrative of what the future could look like. So I leave that with you, and I hope you will join us as you continue to unpack your must-haves, your must-dos, to think about creating an Earth for all. Thank you.